Who'd be a potter? I'd like to know. With prices so high and wages so low, you toil like sweating blackamoors to satisfy your master. And each day you breathe the clay, you die a little faster. So who'd be a potter? I'd like to know.
Pottery has been made in North Staffordshire since the 16th century. At that time, farmers made butter pots and other domestic wares to supplement their earnings from the soil. By the late 18th and early 19th centuries, many of today's well-known firms were producing fine wares. Pottery was made in many other places in England besides Staffordshire, including London, Worcester, Coalport, Liverpool, Leeds, Rockingham and Derby. The potteries lie on the North Staffordshire coalfield, for coal is the essential ingredient in firing. There are 6 towns: Tunstall, Burslem, Hanley, Stoke, Fenton and Longton, which together comprise the city of Stoke-on-Trent. Each town has its own specialities: teapots and other earthenware in Burslem, bone china in Longton, earthenware and tiles in Tunstall. Pottery manufacture was at first very much a domestic affair. Locally dug clay was thrown on a hand-driven wheel, dried, decorated, and finally fired in a coal-burning kiln, which was usually built behind the master potter's house. The size and number of kilns governed the quantity of ware produced. As demand increased and wares found ever wider markets at home and abroad, workshops were built in the courtyard and further kilns added. The master potter began to employ others besides his own family, and small factories were built. Very little power-driven machinery was needed in the early to middle 19th century. Most of the processes used human muscle. Such machines as there were generally lightweight and could be powered by children. They also did a number of other light jobs in pottery factories, or pot banks as they were called. The dominance of the craft element in pottery manufacture was one of the main reasons why the industry remained for so long outside the early factory acts. Numerous small pot banks were interspersed with larger, more elegant ones. And so the urban landscape of the Staffordshire potteries developed, with pot banks and housing crowded closely together. Most of the housing was put up by small speculative builders, but sometimes accommodation was built by the master potter for his employees, not only to help them, but also to broaden the base of his own investments. And several building clubs, forerunners of modern building societies, were formed by pottery workers to help them become house owners. Atmospheric pollution hung like a pall over everything, over pot banks and masters' and pottery workers' houses alike. But then a new firing technology, the tunnel kiln, and the passing of the Clean Air Act in 1956 made the bottle oven obsolete. Within a few years, all but a handful of these characteristic and distinctive features of the potteries had been demolished. Where once there were dozens, only a few have survived. Just a single group at the Gladstone Pottery Museum has been saved for future generations. By contrast, a modern pottery factory looks much like any other factory from the outside. And inside, machinery performs many of the tasks previously done by hand. This factory produces 1 million mugs a week. In the 19th century, the raw materials for pottery, clay, coal and flint, which had been ground in nearby mills, were unloaded at a canal wharf or railway siding and taken to the pot bank. Steam engines were often used to drive the pug mill for mixing clay, and were later applied to all the mixing processes. Clay passed by a system of chutes and pumps through a sieve, where any remaining lumps were extracted. Finally, the excess water was removed in a press. The mixed material, or body, was then ready for the thrower. The thrower's wheel was either powered by a foot-operated treadle or rope-driven from a vertical wheel turned by hand. Both flatware and hollowware could be cast in molds. A blueprint of the object to be cast was first made by the modeler. The model was then taken to the mold maker and a plaster mold was produced from the pattern. Molds for intricate designs consisted of several pieces. Molds were often kept for a number of years, a kind of design library. The caster gathered the slip and poured it into the mold. It was left to stand and then inverted and allowed to harden for a while. The object was detached from the mold, and then the handle for a mug was put on and sponged. In the early 1840s, a new machine was introduced to the industry, the jolly. It combined the principles of the potter's wheel, the lathe, and the mold. One man working a jolly could do the work of several throwers.
I'll sing you a song of a jolly machine, which potters all say is a rattler, and excels every other as yet ever seen. I'm sure you'll pronounce it a spattler. I am quite in earnest, so pray lend an ear. My song it is true and no folly. As from this machine you have too much to fear, it's a thief that I call Master Jolly. A thief did I call it, aye, well you may stare, but prove it I can and most fully. For if it deprives you of making crockware, why what will become of your belly? For it makes bowls and plates in such mighty big rocks. Believe me, I'm no lying sinner. And I'm told by and by he'll make all of our cups, then I'm sure we will go without dinner.
The throwers were alarmed, but the jolly for hollowware, the jigger for flatware, and the lathes for finishing the goods had come to stay. The ware in its green or unfired state was left to dry before the first firing, known as biscuit firing. The ware was fired in saggers. While the base was being made by the sagger maker's bottom knocker, the sides were being rolled out and measured, before being taken to be joined to the base. sagger was then ready for drying. After a biscuit firing, the ware is decorated. Decoration takes several forms. Earthenware is often dipped in a single-coloured glaze or decorated with a simple pattern in slip. Finer wares are first dipped and then further decorated after firing. Ornaments and fine tableware are hand-painted. Other tableware is decorated by the application of transfers. An engraving is made first, and from this the transfers are printed. Transfers are often used for commemorative wear. The preparation of colours for glazing and painting requires a considerable knowledge of chemistry. All but a few of the larger potteries bought their colours already prepared by specialist firms. The decorated ware was now ready for glossed firing. First it was placed in saggers of different sizes and shapes. Some goods were placed flat, being separated by small pieces of refractory ware called spurs to prevent them from sticking together during firing, a process known as dottling.
Down there, thank you. Yeah. He's John and Draft. You want me to draft? Yes, we'll finish it. Well, Jackson, I reckon. We've got another one.
Other goods were placed edgeways on rods separated by thimbles, a process called rearing. Cups were loaded in the sagger by a method known as bat and dump. Firing was expensive, so sagger space was filled up with small items. Clay strips known as wadding were placed around the top of each sagger. And these were made by extruding clay through a metal plate. Wadding made a seal between one sagger and the next when they were stacked. The head placer or cod placer then directed the placing of saggers in the oven. The kiln consisted of two main parts. The outer part was known as the hovel, and when freestanding was bottle-shaped. The hovel acted as a chimney, taking away smoke and creating a draught, as well as protecting the oven inside from the weather. The inner part was the oven. It was round with a domed roof. There were iron bands called bonts around the oven at regular intervals for added strength. Men could walk between the hovel wall and the oven to stoke or bait the fires at the fire mouth. The temperature in the oven could be partly controlled by the damper located in the crown and by the regulating holes. The progress of the firing could be seen through the spy holes. A trial would be drawn from the trial holes at different levels to measure the progress of firing. This method of taking a trial was laid on a sound experimental basis by Josiah Wedgwood in the late 18th century. There was a doorway known as a clamins or wicket, just large enough for a man to go through with a sagger on his head. Heat was distributed inside the oven by truncated and perforated flues called bags, one for each fire mouth, and by a flue going to the center of the oven. Sometimes ovens were grouped together inside a workshop. In these cases, the familiar bottle shape of the hovel was absent at ground level. The workshop protected the oven, and the only part of the bottle shape to be seen was the bulge above the crown leading to the chimney, which protruded through the workshop roof, as here at the Sutherland Works. The placers carried the saggers on their shoulders or heads. They put a rolled-up stocking inside their hats to protect their heads and keep the sagger steady. When the saggers were placed, they had to be arranged so that the wares able to withstand higher temperatures were nearer the heat.
Okay.
It looks a bit top heavy. Looks a bit top heavy to me, Les.
Huh?
Come in. You want to press him back? Through here. It looks a bit. No, put pressure on. I'll send it back.
That'll do.
That's it.
Yeah.
Hurry it up.
Good shot. That's all right.
Broken brick or sagger was used to keep the stacks of saggers or bungs level.
Yeah, what is that?
A wooden ladder, the os, was used to place near the crown.
Yeah.
That's well.
Not so bad. Not so bad, so.
The bad shape saggers are struggle there.
Yeah.
Bad sagger like.
Machine there, you see.
Hey?
Machine there. Not so bad. We get
2, 3, 4, 5, 9.
we'll put
9 saggers. So we get 9 saggers ready.
get 9 and finish it off. And now we got to, well, if we put 4 on there, put 4 on. We'll put 4 on without rods. Okay.
Right.
And then it'll be, that, your 4th end is falling back a bit, John. The back.
A bung of bottomless saggers, called the pipe bung, was placed in the centre of the oven to act as a chimney. Then the other bungs were set in from the outside walls to the centre.
We've got 4 without rods, and then that'll...
So give us 1, 2, 3, 4 saggers, really.
Yeah.
Saggers containing trial rings were placed at different levels and carefully lined up with the trial holes from the outside. The final quarter was set from the centre out to the clamins. An average oven held about 2,000 saggers, and when it was full, the clamins was sealed up with bricks and sand. The trial holes were sealed at the same time. At this stage, the fireman took over. His job was one of the most important in the pot bank. Every firing used a lot of coal. The fires were baited as necessary, some fire mouths receiving more coal than others, depending on the temperature to be reached, the design of the oven, and the direction of the wind. Conditions varied, and the fireman's skills in reading them were vital to the success of a firing. To begin with, the temperature was kept low while the moisture in the ware was driven out. Then baiting increased until, in about 48 hours, a maximum temperature of between 1,000 and 1,250 degrees centigrade was reached. The temperature was partly controlled by altering the position of the crown dampers and by the fire doors and regulating holes.
Dampers down.
Want a poker? You got a little poker for it, huh? Little poker. Just get on with that.
The fireman and his men would stay up with the firing, cooking their food and taking such rest as they could by the oven. Trial rings were taken from the different quarters of the oven towards the end of the firing. The fireman measured their contraction on a scale, and this indicated the stage the firing had reached. At the end of the firing, the dampers were adjusted, the fire doors opened, and the fires allowed to go out. To hasten the cooling, the clamens was pulled down, and the fire mouths were raked out, ready for the next firing. When they were cool enough to handle, the saggers were drawn from the oven and put on specially built staging. Some 19th century pottery masters were known to try and speed up the process by drawing goods hot from the oven. The men were paid according to the amount of perfect ware drawn. In times of bad trade, the master potter often resorted to paying his men in truck, in goods rather than money.
The times are bad, I can't command a ready money bill, and I've so large a stock on hand, my works must soon stand still. I really know not what to do, so wayward is me luck, unless that each and all of you your wages take in truck. I've this, I've that, I've what you will, with prices on 'em stuck, the same as in the invoice bill for you to take in truck. I've grocery goods of every kind and every flavoured tea, or green or black as you've a mind, or Congo or Bohea. I've flour at so and so per stone, both coarse and fine to sell, and when for broth you want a bone, I still can suit so well. I've this, I've that, I've what you will, with prices on 'em stuck, the same as in the invoice bill for you to take in truck. So let the times run how they will, I've taken special care, though I'm without a money bill, you've things to eat and wear. You scarcely men can fail to see the great regard I show, so take the truck and grateful be, and home contented go.
The wares were then packed in barrels made on the premises and sent to markets all over the world. This has all gone, but one 19th century pot bank is preserved for all time. Old machines are being collected and restored, and craft processes kept alive at the Gladstone Pottery Museum. Only the bottle oven stands silent and alone, for a bottle oven firing will never take place again.